What is the purpose of punishment? That's the question we need to ask ourselves when considering the idea of hell. Eternal punishment and the possibility that there's anything one could do that would be deserving of never-ending torture. For the sake of argument, I'm going to ignore the fact that it is questionable at best as to whether the Bible actually speaks of a real place of eternal torment. What I'm going to be talking about is the modern-day evangelical Christian version of hell, the place where people go to suffer in a lake of fire for all of eternity. So what is the purpose of punishment? Punishment is a corrective mechanism. It's meant to regulate behavior, whether that punishment is rendered by a society upon an individual or a parent disciplining their child. The idea is that following the punishment, the offending party will learn a lesson from the punishment and will modify their behavior in order to avoid further chastisement. When considering punishment, we must also consider the method of that punishment as it relates to the degree of the offense. Does the punishment fit the crime? In order for punishment to be effective, the punishment must not be too harsh, as this will only breed anger and resentment in the individual being punished, leading only to a repeat of the behavior in question and possibly more severe disobedience done spitefully in the face of the inappropriate corrective action taken against the individual. If the punishment is too weak, the punishment will have no effect. Simply put, the punishment must be reasonable with respect to the offense. Taking these arguments into consideration, let's look at the idea of punishment within the framework of the biblical God and whether or not hell would be compatible with successful modification of behavior through punishment. The Bible says that nothing man does is good enough for God. Man is in a fallen state, and there's nothing that we can do of our own volition that would allow us to avoid hell. Romans 7:18, Paul says, "For I know that in me dwelleth no good thing." And in Genesis 8:21, God says, "The imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth." And of course there's Romans 3:23, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Because there is nothing which man can do, which would be considered good in God's eyes, we are left to consider degrees of evil. Certainly all actions are not equally evil. You wouldn't consider being a coward or not believing in God just as evil as murder, would you? These things are not deserving of the same punishment. Would you give a child the same punishment whether he stole from the local convenience store or simply ate a cookie before dinner? Certainly not. But the message we get from the doctrine of hell is that every wrong action, no matter how minor, is equal in God's eyes and is deserving of eternal punishment. The famous verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 are universally thought of as the Bible's definition of love. And this is important. In 1 John 4:8, John says, "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." Now I want to direct you back to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, specifically to verse 5. The verse says about love, "It doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil." Love is not easily provoked. Now, with that in mind, let us consider eternal punishment in terms of what we have previously discussed. We've said punishment is a corrective mechanism, that this punishment must fit the crime, as punishments which don't fit the crime will not be effective in changing behavior. But most importantly, punishment is done for the good of the person who has committed the offense. It is to help them modify their behavior in order to be a better person or to better fit in with society, to behave in a more acceptable manner. When actions taken against an individual are no longer fitting for the crime and the severity of those actions far outweigh the offense, this is no longer punishment, but revenge. And revenge is not founded on seeking the highest good of the offending individual. Revenge is about being provoked and taking action based upon anger, the expression of hatred and a lust for seeing another person suffer because of how their actions make the revenge seeker feel. Now back to 1 Corinthians 13 again, this time to verse 7. It says that love beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. This tells me that a God who is all about love could endure the sins of cowardice, fear, or even murder. But clearly, if God feels every action that man takes is deserving of eternal punishment, this is certainly not punishment, especially when taking into account that man was created imperfect. And free will is not an excuse here, because God, being all-knowing, understood beforehand that Adam and Eve were destined to fall. So God is taking revenge upon those whom he created, not punishing them in order that they may have an opportunity to improve and become better people, but simply to pacify his anger and lust for suffering. This is not love, and it does not seek the highest good of his creation. So, in conclusion, we have seen that quite clearly that the idea of eternal punishment is not only immoral, but is also totally out of the character of a God who is claimed to be the very embodiment of love. It is not moral to conclude that every wrong action is equally evil and deserving of the same punishment. Punishment should be done with the hope of seeing the highest good arise from the one being punished. It should not be done with the goal of making the one administering the punishment feel better. That is called revenge, and is done out of hatred, not out of love. Eternal torment, by definition, never ends, and therefore cannot fit into a reasonable definition of punishment. The individual has no opportunity to correct their actions following the punishment. Hell is God's place of eternal revenge.